So welcome. My guest today is Rick Brown. And hi Rick. First of all, hi Rick.
Hi Iain.
And Rick's had a very fascinating life. And I was first aware of him in the early 60s when he was the singer in an American band called The Misunderstood, who were a very influential band. And they came over to London and they influenced big artists like The Move and Pink Floyd and many other bands that were in the UK scene at the time. And what particularly got me interested in chatting with Rick for this interview was it wasn't just about the music. He had a whole adventure. He was drafted into the US Army to fight in Vietnam. He deserted, came back to the UK, ended up in India, became a Hindu monk for many, many years, moved to Nepal, and then we'll cover the rest of the adventure towards the end of the program. But he's really lived a life. And the interesting thing I thought, Rick, was that The Misunderstood didn't have a very smooth path. And in a way, your life, I know your life is a lot smoother and stable now, but your life also, outside The Misunderstood, wasn't very smooth either, was it?
No, not at all.
Yeah. But you survived and you learnt a lot and you followed the path of life, which is always interesting. So let's talk about The Misunderstood. So you lived in a place called Riverside in California and you joined the band. You became the singer. You'd never sung before. So
Right.
What was that like, just joining the band and singing?
Well, I remember the first rehearsal was the first time I even knew that there was a group, and I wasn't aware that the Blue Notes had played before, or even. So anyway, I tried out on the band, and we just started right away. And then the next thing we got Steve Whiting, and then did about a year of recording and stuff, and kind of all British, blues, riff rock, basically, and. Then we got Glenn in the band, and then it was just like, wow, we realized we could just do it. We can make noise. We learned from the Yardbirds you could make noise in the music.
Yeah, so you were obviously young guys, you were influenced by bands like the Yardbirds from the UK, but what was special about you was that it's like Glenn played the steel guitar, which is unusual, wasn't it, in a rock band? Very.
And he also had the long. I had never seen anybody at that time with hair as long as him. Out of nowhere, here's this guy. We got in the band that had longer hair than anybody in the whole music business. It was down to here,
Yeah. So he had this steel guitar,
right.
and Steve Whiting, he played bass with a bottleneck, so he was doing something different. He had lots of feedback.
He did all kinds of stuff. He played the bass through Fuzzbox, and he really was quite innovative bass player.
We'll play a couple of tracks at the end of the interview, The Misunderstood, but how would you describe the music at the time?
Well, at the time it was really British riff rock that we were attracted to, and so we were kind of doing the Yardbirds. Okay, so then when the Yardbirds came out with Mr. You're a Better Man Than I, all of a sudden there was a message in the music that wasn't just about holding a girl's hand and inane love songs, and so all of a sudden it became interesting because they were kind of objecting to racism, and they were talking about peace on earth, and so it just became much more interesting. So all of a sudden we became like a message band, and that's the time we started really coming out with songs that were trying to say something.
Yeah, but also you had a lot of feedback on stage, didn't you? And you had a unique light show as well.
Yeah, it was attract attention. That was really, the controlled feedback was one of the most influential things, in music that I've ever seen in my life, was controlled feedback.
And what did the audience make of you at the time?
Well, at the time they were amazed because it just wasn't common, and so we would get all the guitars feeding back and then put them on different tremolos and put the guitars up against the amps, and we would leave the stage. Only the drummer would be there, and we would be making this enormous. So we did it at the Marquee Club too. We did it in Pandora's Box, and most of the gigs after Glenn got in, we started doing this feedback with controlled feedback. Not just making some sounds, but actually getting the guitars to function on their own, up against the amps with no player, just playing away.
Yeah.
Three different tremolos. Everybody would leave the stage, including me, and the drummer would be there, and it would just be outrageous.
And then you had this famous gig, insofar as people that really know about the Misunderstood, where you were a support band and a guy called John Ravenscoft, who later became John Peel. He was then living in California. He'd
Right.
come to see the other bands, and he wasn't even going to bother to stay to see you, but you looked interesting at the beginning, so he stayed. And
Right.
that was quite significant, wasn't it, that evening?
Yeah, after the gig, he came up and started talking to us, and that was the beginning of a relationship. You know, it wasn't long after that I was living with him. Him and his wife Shirley.
Yeah, so you and he took you under his wing and kind of was a kind of a manager, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was very enthusiastic, and he remained enthusiastic even after having his heart broken about our band being forced to disgroup. And you know, all this throughout his life, he kept promoting our music. It was because of him and you that we actually are where we are today.
Yeah, actually, John Peel, obviously he died several years ago, sadly, but he actually said that that gig that when he saw you play the first time was one of the 10 most special gigs he'd ever been to, and that guy went to a lot of gigs. So
I think he passed away like 2000 or 1999. He was in the Andes of all places. You know,
it was in Cuscus. It was in Cuscus in Peru. Yeah, I've been there. Yeah. So there was this incredible reaction insofar as the audience didn't know quite what to make of you. You had John Peel - Ravenscoft looking after you, and you went into actually Phil Spector's studios, the Gold Star Studios, and you cut some tracks because you wanted to get a record deal, obviously.
Right. But there was no record deal to get in America. You know, we would take our demos to the record companies in America. They would say, "Well, you know, can you play anything like that's what's on the radio?" Whoa. Well, I guess everybody can do that. We have something different here. That's when John Peel said, "Oh, they're going to really appreciate you in England, but here it's just hopeless."
Yeah. So he encouraged you to move to England. Again, that wasn't that straightforward. I think the rest of the band came first.
Right.
And you came a little bit later, and there was a misunderstanding, and they spent a night camped on John Peel's mother's front lawn because
they came by sea. They came by sea.
Yes.
And I had to wait a couple weeks behind because I had to go to the draft physical.
Yeah.
And so after that was over, I came straight over there. And they're telling me, "Oh, we're already famous. Get over here." You know, I'm like, it was a little different when I got there.
Yeah, so you'd already had the draft letter at that point, had you?
Yes, I'd already had the first physical, right before I came to England, the first physical.
Yeah, so that must have been pretty traumatic, the thought of possibly having to go to fight in Vietnam.
Well, in a way, I just didn't take it seriously. It just seemed ridiculous. I was going to England. I mean, I was going to be far away. I mean, it didn't seem like they could even bother me there.
Yeah, so you came to England, and John Peel's brother knew someone who could possibly help you get a record deal.
Right.
And I think you had got turned down a couple of places, but then you met a guy called Dick Leahy, who worked at Fontana Records, and he signed you.
Right.
Was that something that you kind of expected to happen, or were you must have been delighted, obviously, but were you quite surprised that you got a deal relatively easily?
No, but we were pretty enthusiastic about it. As soon as we got there, we kind of played a gig at the Marquee Club. That I could see the reaction. People just loved us. We were doing some Yardbird stuff, and we weren't even doing our original stuff at that point. We were doing "I'm Not Talking" and "Ain't Got You" and all this stuff, but people really liked it. They really liked it. So I thought, well, it seemed like we had no competition. Hendrix wasn't there yet, and Pink Floyd were kind of taking notes at our gig,
So, how was it? Do you think you were so far ahead because the psychedelia scene was just beginning, and you from a fairly small town in California, you were kind of almost leaders of it.
I remember I had a tambourine that I used to play at the gigs in Riverside. That said "Acid Blues." I wrote "Acid Blues" on this tambourine. I had never even taken acid before at that point. It was just like it just seemed like the coolest thing going,
And did you? What was the kind of? What was your process in far of trying to get the music to be different and special and break through barriers that were there, because that, even though the British scene in the early 60s was exciting, in a way it wasn't always imaginative.
No, I agree. But I tell you, it wasn't really until Tony Hill joined the band that we actually started writing the music that made a difference, like Children of the Sun, and I Can Take, it was, he and I just, but by the time he got in the band, it was just obvious that there was this incredible movement of consciousness that, was being, called psychedelia or whatever. But, some people say it's about drugs. No, it wasn't about drugs. It was about, whatever it took to get your consciousness to expand, so you stop identifying with matter and start identifying with the spirit. And it became, it became grounded, with Tim Leary and everybody. It became grounded in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which was Buddhism. And so all of a sudden there was this introduction of Buddhism into it, and it wasn't even a question of drugs at that point. It was a question of identifying with the spirit over matter, and also identifying the problems of being identified with matter, like war and hatred and all these things, bigotry, which we were like, we basically picked up from the Yardbirds. This was the message. And it resonated because it was true. And here I was, facing the Vietnam War and a lot of other guys, and what's the point of it? This wasn't even, America wasn't even under attack. It was just ridiculous. Nobody was under attack except the Vietnamese themselves.
So you saw the music as an expansion of beginning of your spiritual journey to some extent.
Well, I didn't really see it. It just seemed like that was the best subject to sing about, as opposed to "I'm gonna hold your hand." Yeah, baby. It was like it was important message, because there was war, there was death, there was all these things we were facing. I remember telling the guys in England, other musicians, you guys don't even have anything to worry about. You can just make music and fail or succeed according to your music, but we have to face challenges like having to go to Vietnam.
Yeah. That's an extraordinary thing to hang over you, and we don't understand that these days in Europe. You're right, yeah. So anyway, you signed to Fontana Records, and they organised a showcase for you. Do you remember that showcase well?
Very well, very well. Well, first of all, Dick Leahy told us that I want to sign you guys, but we can't be dealing with this guy Nigel Thomas.
Who was the manager?
We can't be dealing with this guy Nigel Thomas. So, and there was this guy Peter Saunders, who was our road manager, we were getting. So he brought this guy David Swainson in, who was a rich guy, and he convinced him that we were going to be the next thing. And he was really a cool guy. And so all of a sudden we went from the basement altogether to living in next to Baker Street Park and all this stuff. And it was just all of a sudden we were being driven around in limousines and all we had to do was switch over from Nigel Thomas, who was like holding us back because he was like they didn't want to deal with him. That was basically it. It was either we'll sign you, but not with this guy.
But he was looking after Long John Baldry and Alexis Corner, so he had a couple of quite big acts. So he was obviously quite successful in his own way, but he obviously didn't get on with Fontana.
Yes. Something like that. I mean, I didn't dislike him at all. I liked it. I liked Nigel. I even saw him again when I came to visit you. I went and visited him. Yeah. He had Saxon. He was doing Saxon.
Okay, who became a huge band. Yeah.
Yeah, became a huge band.
Yeah. So we should mention that the guy who actually signed you, Dick Leahy, he was quite relatively young at that point. Yes. And I know Dick quite well. Well, I used to. He's unfortunately departed now, but because he actually gave me my first job in the record business, which I'd always be grateful for. And he was one of those people, and you could kind of do that in those days. He worked at Ford. There was a big Ford motor car plant factory in Dagenham in East London, and he worked there. That was his day job, and he was a disc jockey in the evening. He'd have his mobile disc jockey. He'd go to events and do that. But he knew music so well. He got himself into the record company. And yes, he after that, he became hugely successful as an A&R man. And he was involved with George Michael for many years and signed all kinds of bands.
Donna Summers.
Yes, and he was involved with a lot of the English acts like the Bay City Rollers and Gary Glitter and Shawadi, many acts that had big hits. Anyway, he he was a good guy, Dick, and we both liked him, which is...
I loved him. I loved the guy.
Yeah.
He loved us too, you know.
Yeah. So anyway, you had this showcase, which is quite a legendary showcase. So just talk us through it, because Fontana hired I think it was a studio, quite a big studio, and they've invited along a lot of press people. And
they didn't hire a studio; they used their own studio.
Okay.
In the Phillips studio, right there next to Marble Arch in Stanhope Place, which was the biggest studio in London. You know, it was like really big inside, and they just had us at one end. Behind us was the control panel. They had us set up at one end with little amps. And at the other end was all folding chairs, and in the other room was the whole, hors d'oeuvres and champagne, and it seemed like they had about 50 people from the media there. Everybody was there that gets invited when they are launching a new mainstream record, and they had posters of us on the wall, and then Jack Barrowstop comes out and introduces us, and first Dick Leahy introduced him, and then the president Barrowstock comes out and introduces us, and then we played 4 songs. We started out with My Mind, and then we went into this thing called The Trip, just segued into The Trip, which was recorded at the time but didn't get saved. And then the third song, The Trip leads up into this real eerie, you're landing in the moon and in the mind, and you get all science fiction-y, and then it just powers into Children of the Sun, and then it ends up with I Can Take You to the Sun, and we just 1, 2, 3, 4, and it was perfect. It was flawless. I remember the last song, I Can Take You to the Sun. I'm sitting there with Tony Hill. He's doing this acoustic guitar thing that was so difficult. Every time we'd ever rehearse it, he couldn't get through it, and he got through it. Because every time he had to get through it in a recording studio or live, he did it. He pulled it off. It was only when he didn't have pressure that he would always stop. And so I was really relieved that he was able to get through that, because that's really a hard guitar part.
And then what happened at the end of the four songs?
First everybody was quiet. Then they all stood up and started clapping. And then after that, it was just a big interview. We were milling around and drinking champagne. They were interviewing us, and there was all kinds of, funny questions, and and asking us, what did we think? Where did we think about that? All these questions, just like you see in a Beatles movie.
And so, kind of, you thought this was it. You kind of made it, I guess, at that point. You've been, as you said earlier, you were being ferried around in limousines, staying at a nice apartment in central London, and here you had a great press reaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, after that, all the newspapers and all the music publications came out with just rave reviews. It was like, man, this is like 100% success. There wasn't a single bad review. It was like a dream review.
And then, of course, when the first record came out, you had a letter from your father, didn't you, about your draft? It was getting serious.
I wasn't really paying attention to the record when it came out. I didn't really know when the record. I knew it was coming out now. We had this press reception, but I wasn't really paying attention at that point to how many it sold or what. Because I knew the response was great. The response from the media. So I was thinking, okay, we're on the way here. And then I get this letter from my father saying, okay, you've got to come back, otherwise you're going to be indicted. And the record company said, okay, well, we'll give you a letter. We'll give you a letter from the record company and also from the management saying you're under contract in England and you can't be part of that because you're under contract in a foreign country. Which doesn't mean a whole lot to a black sergeant in Fort Ord,
And so, and also one of the other members of the band, I think, had a similar problem. So, but you thought you could go back to America and you could sort it all out and come back to the UK, but didn't quite work.
They said, take these letters, give them to the draft board, and then come back,
Yeah.
And you'll be exempt because you're under contract in England. Really, that's what they thought.
And you got back, and you went to the draft board, and
and the guy looked at the papers and said, this shit ain't even American. Threw it in the garbage. Ain't even American. No, he said, this shit ain't even American.
And so you were drafted.
Well, then that's when they tried to get me to be drafted. And I ran out the door, and I literally ran out, and I ran to the highway and hitchhiked back to John Peel's place. And a couple of days later, I got arrested. And they took me to court, and they said, okay, you go to 5 years of prison or 2 years in Vietnam. So I thought, well, if I go to prison, I can't even escape. But if I go to Vietnam, at least I can, or at least I'm in the army, at least I can escape. So it was the best of, bad bargain. My whole intention was to try and get out, and if I couldn't, then to escape. But prison was unescapable. So I made the worst of a bad bargain.
So you went to the boot camp,
Mm-hmm.
and how was that?
Terrible, unbelievable. I mean, shocking. Absolutely dreadful.
So what happened there? Why was it so shocking?
Oh, it's like you go from, especially for me, because I'd come back from England where I was just making it in the music business and being kind of a standout special person. All of a sudden, you're just a number. It's like the ultimate collectivism. You're just a number and a name. You're Brown, number this. And you don't have any importance whatsoever. You're just a cog, you're just a molecule in the body of an elephant. And your only purpose is to do your little bit, and your life and death, and there's no individual importance. There's no individuality whatsoever. It was 100% collectivism. That's how this is what communism is like. This is it. You're just I was a prisoner of war. I didn't want to be there. I was forced to be there, and it wasn't anything to do with me. They weren't attacking America, the Vietnamese. So anyway, it was really terrible because they were like yelling at you and 24 hours a day. There's day and night. It was just nonstop torture basically. And you can understand they're trying to they got 3 months to turn a bunch of kids into killers, who just obey orders and shoot people. That's really not easy thing to do in 3 months. But they did it. I saw people change. People were bitching and moaning in the beginning, and then within a week these guys were like falling into it. Yeah, we're gonna. This is my rifle, this is my gun, this is my... It was crazy.
So the interesting thing, like you just said, it's like almost you felt it was communism and you were supposed to be going over to Vietnam and fighting communism.
Yeah, it was communism. I mean, if you lost your separate identity and you're just a molecule in the body of an elephant and you have no importance whatsoever apart from just the little bit that you play, then and you're just against your will, doing things against your will, then that's the worst imaginable thing of communism.
Yeah, and it kind of, I should actually show you a book, because you have a book like Misunderstood, which is subtitled A Band, a Journey, a Dream, a Disaster. So, and it's an interesting read. I don't know if it's all completely true, but it's certainly a very good read, and there's a lot of truth in there. But
99% true.
It is, okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it says in the book that it was saying they were kind of almost getting you to chant, kill, kill, kill.
Oh, they were, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It was like, kill, kill, kill. Everybody would shout that, and then the guy would, louder, you motherfuckers, kill, 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 louder, louder. And they just keep doing it and doing it. And I was thinking to myself, this is like a mantra. Because from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, I come to know about how you repeat mantras, and all of a sudden here's this mantra, kill, kill, kill. It's a one-word mantra.
Yes, well,
it was so obvious. It was so opposite of what I was projecting in the band. The whole idea of of psychedelia and peace and anti-war. We had Iain Scene, which is an anti-war song, and so here I'm chanting kill, kill, kill. I mean, what's the best that could come out of that? What's the best a mantra like that?
And you started taking LSD in the camp with a couple of... Yeah.
Well, I continued taking LSD.
Yeah. So there you were, doing this marching training, shouting kill, 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 and you were taking LSD there, so it must
And there
have
was
been...
3 other guys in the army that I became friends with who were like me, who just couldn't get into this. And I was the only guy that had been in a band, but nobody even cared about that because nobody ever heard of the band, and it wasn't even something that mattered.
So anyway, you escaped. So how did that happen?
Well, we were supposed to be transferred to advanced infantry training, which was out of California and way back somewhere in America. I had no idea, so I didn't even want to do that. So somebody gave me a thermometer and said heat it up to 110 and then shake it down to 102 and put it in your pocket. Then when you go in to get and complain you have a fever, and then when they give you the thermometer, when they're not looking, switch it, So I did that up for about a week. First I go downstairs, I'm not feeling well. They don't even touch your head. They're just so stupid. They just put a thermometer. As soon as the guy wasn't looking, I just switched the thermometer. So he goes, oh my God, you got a fever. So they put me in a hospital. In the hospital, every 3 times a day, they change your temperature, check your temperature. And 3 times a day, I'd have to go in the bathroom after that and heat up another thermometer and shake it down, and then switch it. And this for a week. Nobody once ever touched my head to see if I had a fever. So during that period, the flight left, and I was the only guy who didn't go. So after I got out of the hospital, then they sent me to the first commander, the first lieutenant, and he really read me the riot act and punched me in the stomach, and told me that I was letting my mother be raped by by VC, and just nonsense. And so finally this black sergeant, who amazingly enough, this whole period was like really amazing, because he comes in and he was like the drill sergeant, a black guy, and he comes in and he tells the lieutenant that's enough, and he picks me up, and I looked at his hand, and he's got a Rosicrucian ring on. I'm thinking, wow, this is just getting so weird. So he takes me to the second lieutenant, and the second lieutenant is like, he looked like Nazi youth, Hitler youth, blonde guy. So, but when he found, he confided in me that he also, didn't want to go to Vietnam, and he also, so he actually agreed to take me off base. He said the next day he was beginning his 1 month vacation, which they get. He said he told me he'd only become an officer to prolong having to go to Vietnam, thinking that after 1 year of officers training, the war would be over. Little did he know that the war is not meant to be over. There's no money in peace. And so he agreed. He said, next day I'm getting a month off. So where you want to go? I said, I'm going to Haight-Ashbury, San Francisco, to see my friends. So he came along with me. He stayed with me for a month. Then he went back. I don't know what happened to him, but he actually drove me off base in his car.
Okay, so you escaped.
Yes.
At Haight-Ashbury.
Mm-hmm.
But you ended up in prison, didn't you? Didn't they come and find you and arrest you, take you back to prison?
Yeah. Well, they didn't really find me. It was something else. I was staying with friends. Right as soon as I got there, I was staying with friends, and the very next day, I came in contact with the Hare Krishna, the Hindu mantra, which at that time nobody ever heard of. I just heard there was this, musical sound, mantra sound, meditation, musical meditation in the park, and so I went, and that's how I met the Hare Krishna, people who were just the hippies who were just starting it out. A few people there. That's how I got it, because I was really attracted to the idea of music being meditation.
Yeah.
But these guys I was living with, they were like selling acid and stuff, and and eventually, I met the guru of the Hare Krishnas and asked him, what should I do? And he said, well, you should come to India and stay with me in this place called Vrindavan, which is a holy place to this day in India. And so I said, well, I don't have any money, I don't have a passport, I'm a fugitive, I don't have any freedom. So he said, don't worry, you just chant this Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, and everything will fall into place, guaranteed. And so that's what I did. And sure enough, somebody gave me their ID, and I was able to get a passport with their ID, and somebody else gave me some money to get a ticket. And so all this is ready to go. And I was getting ready to leave, and I was staying with these guys. And all of a sudden, like a few days before they were supposed to leave, the place gets busted. They weren't looking for me; they just were busting the place. And I got swept up, and when I was arrested, I actually showed them my ID, my passport that I had just gotten in this other name. So they thought that's who I was. So I was in there for like a week, and there was no arraignment, there was no anything, and I was just like, I was in there with people I knew, and I couldn't believe, how terrible it was, because I'm thinking, here I am, all I wanted to do was be in a band. And now I'm facing, desertion of the army. I'm facing passport fraud. I'm facing drug bust. All this, just because I wanted to be in a band. And what am I going to do now? And so after a week, I was really worried, but I was chanting that mantra. And after a week, I remember one morning I got my real name was called. And I didn't budge, And then they called the name I'd been arrested under. And I looked up, and there's 2 MPs. At the gate at the door of the cell, 2 MP, a black MP and a white MP, and there was this guard, and they were saying, "You're Richard Brown, and we know who you are. We're taking you back." And they showed me a picture of myself, and I just said, "No, I don't know what you're talking about. Just what else are you going to say?" I wasn't even no, it's wrong. It's just like, no, I don't want to even deal with this. So they told the guy to put me in a special holding cell, and they're going to go clear my papers out. So they put me in a special holding cell, and I just immersed myself in this mantra and just rolled up in a ball and just, I was all alone in this other place. And I just decided I'm not even going to...
So when you were repeating the mantra, did you believe at that point it would influence what was going to happen?
Absolutely, absolutely.
You did. So in a very short space of time, that's what I find very interesting in your story. You weren't that familiar with the Hare Krishna movement. You met a few people, you stayed with them, you started chanting, and you had this faith, and you just chanted when you were in the prison. And we don't have to go into all the details, but then you managed to get out of the prison. Legally, you got out briefly. Then you were whisked away, went down to LA, and got a false passport, and then came to England.
Yes, on the way to India. On the way to India,
yeah. And it's like, that's what is intriguing, that you had this faith in this mantra, Hare Krishna, and you were not even properly inducted. You were just kind of met some people who...
No, I had been initiated, but I had met the guru. Initiated, the guru was going on his way back to India. He was in his 70s. He was in his 70s. So I was 20, and he was in his 70s. So he was really a learned person, and so I got initiated, and he told me this mantra. Even if you don't understand, what it means, it works. It's like you don't have to know how medicine works for it to have an effect. So it wasn't even like I had so much faith in it. It's almost like that's all I had. It was like when you're in jail and you're getting facing, you're busted. It's like, what do you got? What do you got? What's your safety here? You got this mantra and what? So you take shelter in the mantra, and sure enough, it paid off. I actually got out of there miraculously.
So you went to the UK on the false passport, and you ended up briefly staying with Jeff Beck.
Yeah, when I got to England, I stayed with Steve Whiting's girlfriend, who got me into the country because I didn't have a visa, and a couple of days later, I met with Peter Saunders, who had been our road manager. And who had coordinated us getting that record deal, and so he had our equipment, that had been purchased for the Misunderstood, and he was renting it to Jeff Beck. I had no idea about any of this. I got there and I go to meet him, and he goes, "Hey, you stay with Jeff. I'm his road manager now. He's using your old equipment," and so he put me in an apartment with Jeff Beck, and it was a couple of weeks. So we stayed together, and he was always a super nice guy, and we didn't have anything but fun,
Yeah, and at that point he had the Jeff Beck group, and he was Ronnie Wood and Rod Stewart. So
I went to rehearsal. I went to a gig at the Marquee. I heard him play Beck's Bolero, and met Rod Stewart and Ron Wood, and it was amazing,
Yeah. So somehow this mantra chanting was starting to open up something for you.
Oh, it saved my life, a couple times. Already I'd been here. I was on my way to India, and so far this mantra did what he said it did. It made things happen.
Okay, so you arrive in India, and then you have your bag stolen with your money and your belongings. So is that right?
I didn't really have any belongings. I had a little, somebody grabbed the bag. There was no money. There was no money.
Okay, so because you say in the book you lost all your money and belongings, but that wasn't very much.
But with the passport, I had my passport, the false passport. I had that in my pocket. So then I went down to Brindaban, and I went to the ashram where they said my guru was living, and at this point he was not famous at all, and there was nobody there, so they wouldn't let me stay in this place because there was nobody there at all. As a matter of fact, the first 3 years I was in Vrindavan, there wasn't a single other Westerner from the entire world that I ever saw. For 3 or 4 years, I was the only
but
one.
when you went there, what was your intention? Okay, you were getting away from the draft and the possibility of fighting in Vietnam. I get that, but did you have an idea you'd stay there in an ashram for several years, or was it just things unfolding and seeing what happened?
It was all those, but it was the whole thing of the psychedelic, revealing kind of the spiritual side of life, and then that turning into a desperate situation with the draft, and then finally meeting a guru and getting this mantra, and then all of a sudden there's this spiritual place. I'm supposed to go there, and here I am. And wow, and the world is just a fire. I mean, it's not like I had any other options. I was just like, the only way out was in. That was the only way out was in. And so I just was turning, spiritual life became, not just an escape route, but it became a purpose of life. Because people have to die in any case. So the spiritual life became the goal. That became the life that I wanted to follow. I actually wanted to achieve success at it. I wasn't just there to hide, I could have hid anywhere. I could have gone to Canada. Why
Yeah.
go to India? I came there to meet my guru, and the whole purpose of having a guru is to follow his instructions and make progress, spiritual progress.
And you were able to completely surrender to that.
Well, I was living in an association with nothing but saints. There was not a single person there who had any money or any interest in money or even respected people who did, you know. It wasn't poor people. It was like people who, you know, learned people who had given up the world, who had there for spiritual purposes. So I was associating with those people, and that was the only thing that they had to respect for. And so that was the only thing that I was even interested in. There was no attraction to be, you know, nobody even knew what a rock band was. I'm in this ashram, nobody spoke English.
Yeah. It's just...
What to speak of knowing, they didn't have the Beatles, they didn't know rock and roll, they didn't know anything. They didn't care less about my background. As a matter of fact, I was an untouchable. I was such an untouchable because I had come from a beef-eating family that they wouldn't even, you know, touch me. If I stepped on their shadow, they would take a bath. I mean, they were so, and this is a couple of years like that. I mean,
So,
being
hang
an
on.
outcast.
So, if they stepped on your shadow...
No, if I stepped on their shadow,
yes, they would
on
take
their shadow, they would take a bath. If I touched them,
Wow.
forget it. I wasn't allowed in the kitchen. I wasn't allowed to see the food before they offered it to the deity. I was like really, you know, far from being a rock star. I was like an untouchable, complete outcast, and I actually felt that way because that's the way everybody else felt. You know, they had a reason for feeling that way. I had no knowledge. I had no background. I was from a meat-eating family. It was like I was like a disgusting character to them, you know. So it took a couple of years. For them for me to actually get into the program and prove that I was sincere.
So when we last talked a couple of weeks ago, whenever it was, you were saying that there was this transition which happened very fast because obviously you were singing a rock band, you were hoping to be a rock and roll star, huge ego, and here you go to India, and your focus is on eliminating your ego. It's quite a shift in a fairly short space of time, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it was also a circumstance as well as, you know, the revelations that had been coming as a result of these circumstances, the psychedelia, to, you know, Tibetan Buddhism, all of a sudden meeting a guru in India, and then, you know, getting into a mantra, and then getting to the spiritual place, and being associated with all these saints, you know, who were saintly people, and nobody had any respect for money or women or, you know, power. It was all about, you know, spiritual advancement. Whoever was the most humble was the most. And so I just had my ego shattered. Whatever was left of it was totally shattered.
But on a practical basis, because you in your book, show it again, you know, you had quite an active life with some very nice sounding women. Did that not kind of, how was that just to completely let go of that?
It just disappeared. It just wasn't even a question. There was no women who ever came to that ashram, or I ever saw it. You know, there was a few village women walking around, but they weren't exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, in your head, you could let go.
No, I totally forgot about that.
You really, really?
Yeah. Even when I went to England on the way back, I just was not into girls. I'd kind of, you know, taken the position I'm going to be a monk, and so I remember when I got to England, and I get to Steve's girlfriend picks me up, Trish. She's like a, you know, British socialite, you know, kind of, I don't know, real high class call girl or something. It seemed like, and so she takes me to her apartment and she asked me, "Don't you fuck?" I said, "Well, not really." So she was like amazed. I wouldn't even have. But I told her, I said, "You're like, you know, you're Steve's girlfriend, man. What are you talking about?" You know. So I didn't really. So I just totally. And I never passed semen for 6 years. I had nothing to do with that. It's completely got off.
Okay. And so the conditions you were living in were very, very basic, weren't they? The food was even.
Some of the places I lived had no electricity. Some of the places had no toilet, no electricity, no water, no well. You had to beg for your food in the village, and you had to use an oil lamp. And there was just no, and there'd be like scorpions and all kinds of weird stuff. It was pretty funky. There was no beds or furniture. You have to forget that stuff.
So you were begging for your food?
Yeah. Yeah, along with everybody else.
Yeah, so you would go out in the morning with a plate, or how did that work? How did the begging work?
Yeah, you have a cloth with utari, which you tie at one end, and you just carry it, and it's like you just take 4 corners and you just got a bag, and people throw some chapati in there, pieces of chapati or something, and you take every house gives you a little bit, and you collect it and bring it back and put it in a bowl and pour some water in there from the well or wherever, if there was a well. And
So you beg for the water as well?
No, the water you would get from the well if there was a well. But some of the
Okay.
places I stayed, there was no well. You had to you had to carry a little pot of water from downstairs, way down the stairways where there was like a place where people stayed and had a well. And there was no bathroom or toilet. You had to go out just out in the sticks with a stick, out in the sticks with a stick, to keep the hogs away. You know, because they're really in a hurry. These hogs, literally knock you over. Pretty wild.
How did you feel yourself changing during that time? Were you aware of a process of letting go of things, or were you just so engrossed in what was happening, it was just moment to moment?
No, as soon as I got to this ashram where I was staying, you know, the Swami Ban, who was the guru at that place, and he was a guru brother of my guru, he had a book called Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that he had translated from Sanskrit into English, and so it was like a guidebook how to live this life, and from the 14th century, written in the 14th century. So I was reading these books, learning Sanskrit, studying and learning all this, and then also learning all the behavior and the etiquette and the meanings behind those things, and just immersing myself in the subject. It was what else are you going to do? It's like, if you're there to get into the subject, then do it. You know, because that's what everybody else was doing. There was no alternative. Rather, there was not even an attraction. Nobody even respected those people who weren't spiritually advanced. Weren't even respected, and people who were spiritually advanced were totally humble. It was like, it's like the more advancement you made, the humbler you got. And so a proud person was the very epitome of not being advanced.
But you got sick, didn't you? You
many times.
Yeah.
No, they have germs in the water over there. You don't even need a microscope. You can see them with the naked eye. I'm just joking. But I mean, you really, my body, most Westerners, they're not at all immune to the kind of bacteria and amoebas and stuff in the water there. So you get amoebic dysentery and all kinds of stuff.
And when you got sick, how was that? Were you because I think you were taken to hospital, weren't you, sometimes? And they had
a hospital in Brindaban called the Ramakrishna Mission Hospital, which was run by the Ramakrishna Mission. And so they were nice, they were nice. It was free. Everything was free because then India was socialist. So, I never once went to a hospital anywhere in India where they asked me for my ID or any money or anything. It was just like, I was there under Swami so-and-so, and nobody ever said, who are you really, or what's your ID, where do you live, sign this, nothing. And when I leave the hospital, they would give you some medicine and you're gone. There was never any money involved. It just never occurred to me that it even cost money. It was just like, you want to see a doctor, you just go,
And did you think you might die?
Oh, sure.
And you
at one point, in 1970, they were telling me that if you don't let us take out your colon, then you're going to die. They wanted to take out my colon, and they wanted to attach my colon to the side of my stomach and have a plastic bag you wear. It's like colostomy or something they do. And I said, no, I don't. Let me die then. So I definitely don't want to live like that. And so then later, I had an opportunity to actually meet the president of India, V.V. Giri. And he, in the course of our second meeting, he told me about his doctor, who was a homeopathic doctor in Gol Market in Delhi. So he sent me to this guy. And the guy basically cured me.
With homeopathy? Wow.
First time I ever had such an incredible response.
So how long were you actually in India for?
At one stretch, from January 68 till the end of 73. So 6 years.
6 years.
At one stretch without leaving.
Yeah.
The second 3 years I was there, I didn't even have a passport. Because my passport had expired after 3 years, and I sent it into the American embassy, and they sent a letter back saying, we know who you are, come turn yourself in. And so I showed the letter to Swami Ban, and he said, I just burned this letter and go walk around this holy mountain and you'll be protected. And so 3 more years passed, and they never came for me. But every time I'd go for a visa, I said my passport didn't come back yet, and they would just sign on a piece of paper. They would just take a piece of paper out of a notebook and say that visa extended for 1 more year pending renewal of the passport, and stamped it. And 3 years in a row, I got that paper stamped.
So you said you walked around the holy mountain to be protected.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, a few times. And you know, I was never associating with any Westerners. There was nobody I could talk to about any other subject other than the spiritual path that was prominent in this ashram, and nobody had any respect for, you know, materialistic-minded people or even rich people.
No, I understand. I just find it extraordinary, and I give you tremendous credit for this, that you were able to have this incredible transition from this materialistic Western society. And as I said earlier, you were totally letting go into, and okay, you said you had no option because the consequences was going to fight in Vietnam, and I get that, but still.
Well, I was also enthusiastic to actually be successful in this, because there was this whole discipline.
Okay.
There was this whole
so what does success mean to you then, in terms of the discipline?
Ultimately, success meant being totally just detached from bodily desires and developing a love for God. You know, that's what it was.
Yeah, developing a love for God.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And all the time you do the chanting, the Hare Krishna chanting?
Yes. Every day you had a certain number to chant, 16 rounds, which is, you know, every mantra is 16 names, and you have to chant 16 times, you know, so every single day it was, you know, it would take 3 or 4 hours to do the chanting. Plus there was all these programs, and, you know, at lunchtime, in the morning, at night, they would have, you know, worship ceremonies in the temple, and they'd offer food, and everybody would be doing congregational chanting together, you know, with the mridanga drums and kartas. It was all music. It was all, every day was music, you know.
Yes, well, music through the chanting, yeah.
Yeah, musical chanting and prayers, and not just chanting a mantra, but also chanting prayers in Sanskrit, and all these guys I was living with were all totally dedicated to this. I was really living with good association, you know. I mean, for making spiritual progress, you better live with spiritual people.
Yeah. Did you ever have any reflection of how much you were changing, or was that just somehow not relevant?
No, I used to kind of feel like I wasn't changing fast enough. You know, my progress, spiritual progress, it's like if you're ever satisfied with your spiritual progress, you're not getting anywhere. If you're getting somewhere, you're not going to be satisfied with it.
Oh, but that's just the ego mind, isn't it? Just popping in and kind of just reminding you of the Western way of looking at things, really.
Well, also, you know, the more you actually progress, the more you kind of recognize how far you are. You know, it's like, you know, like I notice that people, when they come in as beginners, they're following all these rules and strictly following all these things. They have this inflated idea about how great they are, but yet people who have been there for a long time and really have made progress, they're extremely humble, and they don't have, they consider everybody better than them, you know?
Yes.
This dog over here has got more devotion than I do. That's how little devotion I have, you know? But a beginner guy, I'm so full of devotion, I follow all these rules. Okay. Temporarily, anyway. Yeah.
Talking of dogs, you got bitten by a dog that had rabies, didn't you? And
Yes.
That would, you had to have these awful injections in your stomach, yeah.
Right. So, it wasn't in the stomach, it was in the stomach lining. You know, they don't really go, it's like they squeeze your stomach, they put this really big needle in there, and it takes a long time because the stuff was really thick back then.
Right.
You know, 15 days in a row. And it just makes a lump in your stomach when they just inject all the stuff in there. It makes a lump because it doesn't spread out. Then you got to go back and, you know, take a heating pad from a chapati plate and put it on there so it spreads out. It was pretty funky.
But you didn't think that at the time. You didn't think at the time that's pretty funky. Sure, you must have thought this is quite painful, I would guess. But
yeah, you don't really see things as separate from yourself. You're right in the middle of something, so it's not really something you can look at, analyze as being separate from you. You know.
And that's, I guess, one of the, I'm trying to find out more the keys of this whole process for you, and that's maybe part of it. You're so in what you're doing. You don't ask you earlier about the reflection. It almost doesn't have significance.
Well, it was like the psychedelic music was opening the door to, you know, to spiritual life, and here I was with spiritual life, and the material opportunities of the world have been taken away from me, but I somehow been allowed to live in this spiritual place with these people who were free. I mean, they were freer than anybody, really. They weren't attached to anything, and so it was just good fortune. I was in a holy place that now there's just hundreds of Westerners there all the time, and pilgrims. But I was there when there was no Westerners. I was the first one.
Yes.
Basically, I never saw another Westerner for years.
So you had to learn Hindu and Bengali, yeah,
and Sanskrit, yeah.
Yeah. So you worked hard there, learning those languages.
Well, I was living in an ashram where everybody was Bengali,
Yes.
and I was living outside the ashram. It was Uttar Pradesh, which is Brindavan, which is everybody spoke Hindi, and then this whole spiritual prayers and the books and everything were in Sanskrit. So that's actually, I learned to read and write Devanagari script. And once I learned how to read Devanagari script, and I knew Hindi, so that's the same script as they use in Hindi, so I could read what the Hindi was saying, and I knew the Hindi language, so I was able to read Hindi too.
Yeah.
I could read a Hindi newspaper.
And you did, we won't go into necessarily all the details of it, but you did some really good work in helping to raise funds to build a school for children when you were there.
Well, I remember in 1970, this Guru Van Maharaj, because he had taken me to this other holy place nearby, where he had a little ashram there that was really Stone Age, and there was a property next to a lake, and it was another holy place associated with Krishna. It was called Nandagram. He said they've given us this land here if we'll build a school for them. So he didn't actually tell me to raise money. He told me to get materials. So he gave me a list of, get iron girders this many, and get this many bricks and this many stone slabs and this sizes, and so I had to go out and get all this stuff and get truckers to take it back. Had to get donations from everybody. I had to go to Jaipur, Karoli, Saharanpur, Delhi, all over the place, meeting iron market people, getting people to donate these different, I wasn't asking anybody for money. I remember when I had to meet Jai Dayal Dalmia, who at that time was probably the richest man in India, Dalmia Industries. So he is the guy that was in control of the cement. So when I met Dalmia, I said, well, we need all this cement to build this school, because it was, 9 classrooms with an auditorium. So he said, okay, he'll give me that cement. So, and he'll send it to Brindavan too.
So you're calling it cement.
Yeah, cement.
Yeah.
So he said, well, I'll give it to you. So now are you happy? And I was thinking to myself, yeah, I've been dreaming about cement all my life. You can't believe how happy I am to have truckloads of cement. Anyway, we built the school, and then Ban Maharaj sent me to Bombay to collect money by organizing a musical Simillan, which I had to do with Ravi Shankar's brother and a whole bunch of people. And I put together this musical Simillan called the Bhajan Simillan at the Tejpal Auditorium in Bombay during the war in '71, and got all these famous people to come, rich people to perform for free, and organized it with a bunch of, the richest people in Bombay. And then we produced a souvenir book, and everybody that was going to donate to the school, they did it in the form of putting a souvenir in that ad in the souvenir book, and then they gave the money that way. So I raised a few 100,000 rupees, which at that time was a lot, because rupees was a lot stronger then. And we built the second floor of this college that Ban Maharaj had in Brindavan. He actually had a university there called the Institute of Oriental Philosophy, which was a BA/MA college.
And then there came the point where, I don't know, the CIA, FBI or whatever tracked you down, and you had to leave India, and you went to Nepal.
Right.
So again, you had to not so much start again, but you were in a new country. And were you in an ashram then?
No, I just went up there. With a friend, a godbrother. We went up there, and it was right at the absolute epitome of the hippie scene in Nepal. The drug shops were open. It was just like a hobbit land. It was like something out of Middle Earth,
Yeah.
And everything was just so antique and it's just very quaint. It's never been like that since. There was an incredible scene there.
And then you got involved you went to see a ruby mine, which was financed by Peter Sellers and George Harrison. Right. And that took you on the journey where...
Back to India.
Yeah, and that's your business now, because you're living in Thailand now.
Well, that got me into gemstones, but those rubies were very low quality. They had lots of them, but they were very low quality.
Okay,
and my knowledge of gems taught me that only good quality gems had a good effect, and so I quickly got away from those.
Yeah. And then you did go back to America.
Yes.
And you wanted to...
In '79. End of 79.
Wanted to see if you could get out of. What was the Vietnam War? Excuse me. Was the Vietnam War over at that point?
Yeah, I met friends in Bangkok that told me that they had given amnesty and I could go back, and they helped me go back because I didn't have a passport.
Okay, so you went back, and I think you went over the border in Mexico, didn't you?
Right.
And you went to visit your sister, who was very surprised to see you after all those years, because you had no contact with your family.
Yes.
That's right. And in the end, you got a conditional discharge, and
yes.
You were free.
Well,
man.
I got a lawyer who took my case for free, and they arranged for me to surrender to the army first, and they took me back in the army for 2 weeks, but they processed me out, and I didn't know what was going to happen, but at the end they finally said, okay, you're out. They gave me a Chapter 10 discharge, which is unfit for military service.
Yeah.
And because I'm willing to kill people, and so I was out of there. But then I had to face all the passport thing, and that I just got 600 hours of public service, and I didn't have to go to jail or anything.
But how was that going back to the West after living this life in India?
Terrible. God, America was so artificial. Everything was just completely pathetic. I mean, everybody was like, neurotic. American women and American guys, everybody was crazy, flipping each other off and super angry, and everybody was arguing. And the cops were everywhere.
Were you able to hold that space that you'd found in India okay, or was that sometimes, did you get somehow caught up in some of the...
I got caught up in things, but I went to GIA and got my gemological degree, and we got focused on making money. But I remained a vegetarian and a devotee, and chanted my mantras every day, and did what I had to do every day. And then finally I realized I can't stand it here, and I came back in '86 and I moved to Bangkok in '86 permanently.
Yeah.
I didn't want to live in the West. For me, people say, what's the difference? In the West, people have this one life only mindset, In Asia, they have this, reincarnation mindset. So if you have only one life, you're going to think totally different about your life. You have one chance, get out of my way. But if you think there's karma and reincarnation, then there is not just one life. And so it became a whole different way of thinking. And most people don't even realize when they come to Asia that everybody's thinking like that. There's more than one life.
Yeah.
But in America, it's just one life only. Get out of my way.
Okay, so we need to finish shortly. But now you have a lovely wife, you have a son, you're living in Thailand, you have a business. And I presume you still have your practice and you still chant.
Yes, absolutely.
And your beliefs are strong as ever. And it's like...
Yeah, more than ever.
Yeah, and it must be... it's quite something to come from what you came from, have your adventure and what happened to you in India, and then come back to Thailand, and somehow, is it like you combine the two?
Well, see, you start out with blind faith, and then circumstance causes that faith to be tested, and then when the tests work out, then it becomes experience, and then it becomes knowledge, and then you start. It's no longer blind faith. You can't. It's not something you can explain to somebody, but you have an understanding that you're dealing with something real, and more real than the temporary world, which is constantly changing form.
Yes. And so with your friends in people in Thailand, do you have an affinity with them on the spiritual side, or you do? Yeah.
Well, those of them who are have similar mindset to mine. When a person is interested in something, they associate with people who have a like mentality as much as possible.
Yeah, yeah.
So, naturally, I associate with people more who think like I do. But I also have other friends who not necessarily spiritual-minded people, but they're just we just have interesting. We talk about music and things, so. It's not that everybody's going to be good at everything. Some people are more interested in spiritual life. Some people are really good at understanding music. And my son Jiva, he right from the beginning, he picked up music. I didn't even really encourage him. He just got into keyboards and was recordings and making little Lego movies. And he's just been really creative since the beginning.
Yeah.
Now he's he's able to do all kinds of things, especially writing and reading and writing music, playing all kinds of instruments from drums to guitar and keyboards, and producing music and recording music and making videos, and so he's doing pretty good.
And are you happy most of the time now?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean,
Yeah.
As long as things are happy, it's not too hard to be happy if the world is happy or if your situation is happy.
Yeah.
Some people aren't happy no matter what, because it doesn't even depend on the situation. It's just in their own minds. Some people have a lot of money. Oh my God, they're just totally unhappy.
Anyway, we're going to finish now, and I'm going to just show this double CD which we put out of
Lovely.
Misunderstood. And I'll play a couple of tracks maybe at the end. So maybe I Can Take You to the Sun, Children of the Sun. Are they the best two to play, do you think?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and kind of.
They're kind of very different. I Can Take You to the Sun is kind of a ballad, and Children of the Sun is extremely heavy rock.
Yeah, and I like the fact they're very different, and they kind of, you found the sun in a way, aren't you? You were a child of the sun, and you've found the sun somehow in your own way, which is
it's found me is more like it. I went there just being a band, and all of a sudden circumstance took me on. Now I'm in Thailand. Whoever would have? I never even heard of Thailand when I was in the band.
Yeah. Okay, Rick, we're going to finish. Really appreciate you taking the time. Lovely to see you again.
Yes,
and,
you too.
Good luck.
You too. Take
all right,
care.
Cheers, Rick. Bye-bye. Bye.
Guitar and song I dream. The sun is what I find. 'Cause the love I am as you I love, and never stop to doubt. And I see the meaning of the word that grows within, not out. 'Cause I rise in the morning beneath an open sky, with guitar and song I drift and never stop to cry. 'Cause love I am as you I love, and never stop to doubt. And I see the meaning of the word that grows within, not out. Well, I speak of love, but you do not see. 'Cause words are words and they mean nothing more. With half a mind you laugh at me. 'Cause I speak of colors you've never seen before. You've existed in a life that will someday show. I can take you to the sun, but you don't want to go. I can take you to the sun, but you don't want to go. I can take you to the sun, but you don't want to go. Your cells are shredded.